There's some controversy lately about who should be allowed to go into which public restrooms. In a way, it's a good thing, as it has a chance of making millions of people aware for the first time in the year 2016 that gender identity isn't as black and white of a matter as they'd assumed it was. Of course, that also brings to light how many intolerant and willfully ignorant people there are. I don't just mean ignorant as an arbitrary insult for those who disagree with me either. I'll get into why people seem so in the dark to me when they complain about who should be allowed in which restrooms momentarily. But first, I want to address a self-defeating argument that I keep seeing from what I consider to be the right side of the issue. Social media has several pictures floating around like this, with text arguments that read similarly. There are two transgender people, both of whom look convincingly like members of a sex into which they weren't born. In this example, we have Serena, who, despite now having an amazing pair of breasts and a traditionally feminine appearance, was allegedly born male. We also have Buck, who, despite having a manly pair of muscular arms and a devilishly handsome beard, was allegedly born female. The text points out that a law requiring people to use a public restroom that corresponds with the sex of their birth certificate is stupid, because someone who looks as feminine as Serena would be required to use the men's room, and someone who looks as masculine as Buck would be required to use the women's room. People who post this clearly mean well, but it's a poor argument. So let's say Serena were born a woman and looks the way she does in this picture. She's had no cosmetic surgery, testosterone intake, or anything like that, but she identifies most as a man. Or, if Buck were born a man and looked like the handsome mound of masculinity that he does here, but that Buck personally identified as a female. By the logic of the people making posts like this, a trans person who looks like a woman belongs in the women's room no matter how that person feels or identifies, and a trans person who looks like a man belongs in the men's room no matter how that person feels or identifies. Why? Well, for no other reason than society's apparent comfort, and that's the exact dumbass argument that posts like this are attempting to confront. And it's at its very best just pointing out that forcing some trans people into restrooms with which they don't identify is going to cause more confusion, discomfort, and frustration than it solves. Let me give you some clearer arguments for why this bathroom gender bullshit has gotten out of hand and why we should just let people defecate and urinate in whichever restroom they please. Of course, ideally, I'd like to see new and remodeling buildings creating one larger restroom area instead of two smaller ones, featuring seated toilets and urinals, all of which are fully walled in stalls, and it would just benefit everyone. But we can settle for just letting people go into whichever room they prefer for now. So here's why we should. Number one, that's how it's been your entire life, and none of these fears of rampant transgender sex offenders have manifested this whole time. Transgender citizens were not invented in 2016. Throughout every living American's life in this country, no law of this sort existed until now, and chances are that each of you has shared a men's room with someone like Buck or a women's room with someone like Serena more times than you realize. Would it really matter if those people looked any less like they belonged to the gender assigned to that room? Because it shouldn't. Number two, these laws are impossible to practically enforce, and they always have been. Short of forcing citizens to carry their birth certificates with them to every public venue they enter and having some kind of scanner or human security personnel guarding every pair of restrooms, there's simply no way to control this, and doing so would never be worth the cost. In the same way that gender identity is a spectrum, so is gender appearance. Some people, including cisgender people, look androgynous or opposite of the sex labeled on their birth certificates. If Leroy naturally looks like a Leela, it's not his fault that his feminine appearance makes you uncomfortable as he steps up to the urinal beside you. That leads to the next point. Number three, public restrooms aren't comfortable places in general. That's not because some people in there may be secret agents for the opposite sex. They're uncomfortable places because relieving your bodily functions, washing up, and even checking your appearance in the mirror are rather personal and private activities. Doing so in a public location naturally offers potential discomfort for all parties involved. It's okay to have to deal with being uncomfortable sometimes. It's simply not practical for most large public venues to supply every single person with a private restroom, unless you're proposing we eschew indoor plumbing and go with the porta-potty method. I mean, nobody's ever felt uncomfortable in one of those, right? I'm not comfortable sharing a restaurant with someone else's obnoxious 5-year-old hellspawn. However, I'm not proposing that every restaurant provides soundproof vision-blocking cubicles where any form of person that makes me a bit uncomfortable should be forced to take their meals. Mild discomfort is one of the costs individuals sometimes must pay for the many benefits we reap from the collectivist parts of society. History shows that society improves when our discomforts are the result of inclusion, and it's at its worst when discomfort is the result of exclusion. We're better off with a white man feeling uncomfortable sharing the front of the bus with a black woman than we are with that black woman feeling uncomfortable as she's quarantined to the back of the bus. Number 4. Signs don't stop crimes, and neither do laws. Law enforcement can help stop crime, but the more trivial laws we ask them to enforce, the less time and other resources they have for enforcing the ones that matter. The only actual arguments I've heard posited in favor of a strict sex-based restroom restriction law, apart from general discomfort, is that people don't think that children and adults can be considered safe from mild sex offenders, vile rapists, and everything in between in a restroom where the opposite gender could come walking in at any time. Now, I tried for about 5 minutes to think of an even dumber argument than that, but I couldn't do it without dipping into reptilian conspiracy theories, and then my ears started to bleed from the pressure in my head, so I just gave up on it. I find it difficult to accept that anyone believes that people who are willing to break a law are going to be thwarted from doing so by the existence of another and less severe law. I've accidentally walked into a women's bathroom before, and I wasn't hauled out in handcuffs, nor did I disintegrate immediately upon entry. If someone is willing to sexually assault you, they're probably not going to do it in a public place in the middle of the day. And if they are prepared to do that, they're even less likely to stop because a sign told them they couldn't go in there. For that argument to hold water, those making it need evidence of significant instances of transgender or opposite gender sexual assault taking place in the restrooms designated for those of opposite sex of the perpetrators. Then they need to supply ample evidence to support the claim that making it illegal for those people to enter the restrooms before raping someone would have done anything to prevent those crimes. Something tells me I'll be waiting for a while before both of those positions are validated. It's almost as if a position contingent on both of them being true is invalid.